Hi there. What we're going to do today is we're going to learn how to plant a bare root rose. Now I realize this can also be a bit confusing. Do you bury the bud union? How big should the hole be? All that kind of stuff. And we'll cover that later. Don't worry about it. But the first thing and the most important thing to talk about is what do you do when the rose shows up? Either in the mail or you purchased it at a store. Well, because it's either been in the mail or been sitting around a bit, it's probably dehydrated. First thing you do, unpack it, throw it in a bucket of water just like this. You can add a little vitamin B1, nothing wrong with that, a lot of people do that, but make sure the roots are in the water completely so it can just start to drink up some water. That'll help it a lot when you go to plant it later. Now, what if you can't plant right away? Well, you can only leave it in a bucket of water for about 48 hours, maybe 3 days tops. Anything more than that, the rose actually drowns because it's too much water and it can't handle that. So if your ground is frozen or you're going out and you can't plant right away, you got a couple choices. First of all, if you've got a nice cool place, around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, that you can store it, go ahead and put it in the back of the packaging with a plastic bag, some damp newspaper around the roots, seal it up good and tight so no air can get down in there, and put it in that cool, dark place. Keep it out of the light. This is known as what's called dormant storage. You're keeping the rose dormant, preventing it from pushing out new growth. That's one way to do it. You can also heal it in. If it's a bundle of roses or whatever, or even just the one rose, dig a trench, throw the roots in, kind of bury it up, even bury about half the canes. That heals the rose in. That's also a real good way to take care of that. So that's another way to do it. But some people do up north when they get them, they actually dig a hole, they put the whole thing in the ground horizontally, and they bury it about a foot deep. That'll also keep it dormant all season long. So those are a couple ways that you can do in case you can't plant right away. But assuming you can plant right away, first thing you do, water, 48 hours. The rose has been soaking in water for about 24 hours minimum, no more than 48. 3 days if you have to stretch it a little bit, but that 24 to 48 hour window is really good. And by the way, this is not a real bare root rose. If it did, it'd have a longer, much nicer root system. But I dug this one out of a pot because I'm going to go ahead and plant it in the ground. And this way I can at least show you how to plant a bare root rose because the rules are the same. First thing, the bud union. Oh my gosh, have we all heard about this one. If I live up north, bury the bud union. If I live down south where it's warm, don't bury the bud union. It doesn't matter, bury it anyway, no matter where you live, do bury it, mound it, do all this kind of stuff. It just gets so confusing, it can make your head spin. Okay, we're going to clear this up, make a real simple rule. Number one, no matter where you live, this is what I'd like you to do. Number two, whether the rose is own root or whether the rose is grafted, it makes no difference to me. You're still going to plant it the exact same way. This is what the bud union is on a rose. It's where the canes come out of. You have the rootstock, you have a shaft, then you have the canes growing out. I want you to bury this no matter where you live and no matter what kind of plant it is, grafted or own root. Here's why. If I plant this with above the ground, and here's my soil level, look what happens when the wind comes. I have no stability. That's called wind rock that can shake the plant loose. It can even tear it loose out of the ground. I've actually had it happen. Now, what if I planted it this deep and I buried this where the junction comes out of, so now I've got two canes coming out of the ground. Look how much more stable that plant is in the ground, okay? That's why I want you to bury this no matter where you live and whether it's an own root or a grafted rose. In fact, you don't even have to worry about what kind of rose it is. Just wherever that junction is, make sure you bury that junction deeper so we can prevent wind rock. So hopefully that clears up the bud union question. We're ready to start planting the rose. I'm going to start digging my hole now. And this brings us to another point. Besides the whole bud union question, there's always the question, how big should the hole be? You hear the standard rule of thumb, 2 feet by 2 feet. Well, congratulations if you live in sandy soil. I live in the Carolinas, I got clay. I can't dig the 2 feet by 2 feet. But more so than that, here's the whole point about this thing. If you've got to dig a hole 2 feet by 2 feet, you have not been doing your soil maintenance all along. I'm digging in a garden bed, which most of you are digging in. This bed is about 5 years old. Every year I put down fresh compost and a fresh layer of mulch, like I've talked about in my other videos, okay? And so as a consequence, all my soil is good. So I don't have to dig a 2 foot by 2 foot hole in order to have great soil. I've got a garden here that's probably 50 feet by 20 feet. That's all good soil because I've been doing my soil maintenance over the years, every single year, no matter what happens. So for that reason, I'm not going to dig a 2 foot by 2 foot hole. Plus, I've got all this wonderful soil life going on down here. If I dig a big hole and put in fresh soil, then I've taken all that great life out of the soil. So for that reason, make sure you amend your beds, layer of compost, layer of hardwood mulch every single year. Don't rake it out. And over time, your bed gets going, and then you do not have to dig a big hole. I'm only going to dig a hole big enough to get the rose in and have myself a little spare time while the other person's still digging that 2 foot by 2 foot hole 3 days from now. Okay, that should do it. I've been digging my hole. I've gone more deep than I've gone wide because, again, I've got the nice living soil. I've got my rose here, so periodically I can pull it out of the bucket of water, tuck it in there, make sure that I've got enough depth to bury that bud union. Remember, we talked about that. And then I've done is just mixed a little compost with the soil that I pulled out, about a 50-50 mixture. This kind of enriches what's down there, basically. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to plant the rose, and for that, I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer. We're ready to go ahead and start planting the rose. First thing I'm going to do is just going to lay it in the hole, support it. I want to make sure that bud union is deep enough. That's where your shovel comes in handy. There's my soil level. There's my bud union. I'm about nice and deep. That's going to prevent that wind rock from taking place. So I've got here my soil, which is about 50% compost, 50% the native soil I dug out. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of work some of that in there a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of tamp it down with my hand. I don't want to pack it hard. I just want to tamp it. Now the rose is starting to stand on its own a little bit. I'm fairly full now, about halfway. What I'm going to do is take some of the water that I've got, that I've been soaking it in, and I'm actually going to pour a little bit of that in there. That'll help take some of the air holes out, help settle it down a little bit as well. And at that point then, when it starts to drain, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest. And you can see that bud union going in nice and deep. Got my nice soil here, just tamping with my hands. I'm not a big believer on stomping it down. And can you see now why I've buried that bud union? Look what happens when the wind comes. This plant isn't going to move. That's why no matter what kind of rose it is, own root or grafted, I want you to bury that. Last thing but not least, so I know what rose I planted, I'm going to go ahead and put the tag back on. And the last thing I'll do is take some of this water and just water it back in. Get rid of that air hole, give it a nice drink of water so it can settle in, and then take some mulch and mulch it back up. And that keeps that soil moist and really gives that rose a happy home. That's basically it. I hope we took some of the mystery out of this whole process, particularly that whole one about how high or low should you bury the bud union and how big should the hole be. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is fertilizing a bare root rose, or actually not fertilizing a bare root rose. My personal opinion, don't do it. Let the rose settle in of its own natural rhythms. It's got to get roots down. It's just got to get going. If you try to fertilize it, you might push it too fast, and that might actually end up stressing it out. So don't fertilize it first. Let the first sets of leaves come out, maybe when you get about 3 or 4 inches of growth and you see some nice leaves popping out. Then you can go ahead and throw some fertilizer down. But what kind of fertilizer? Well, I always talk about organics because they're slow release. I think that's important. But whatever you use, don't use something that has a high first number. That first number is nitrogen. That's top growth. We're not concerned for this first season about the top of the plant. We're concerned what's going on under the ground with the roots. So my advice is wait, don't fertilize, be patient. When you've got about 3 or 4 inches of growth with some nice leaves, then it's okay to go ahead and put some fertilizer down. But use something that's a low nitrogen, which is that first number, a low first number. I hope this helps a little bit. If you got more questions, I'm going to advise you to go to our Rose Forum, which is just paulzimmermanroses.com/forum on the screen now. Come over there, post some questions, come visit with us, talk to us a little bit, and we'll try to clear up a little bit more. In the meantime, have fun.